Hello, my name's Hamish Renton, Managing Director of HRE Global, Europe's leading FMCG consultancy.
And I'm Danny, Hamish's co-host for Season 3 of the FMCG Insider, an ideal podcast for all those interested in an insight into the food and drink, health and beauty industries.
And we'll be looking into various facets of these allied industries, chatting to folk we know, industry experts, talking about their career experiences, their advice, their insights, their bloopers, and their general thoughts that could be helpful to you, dear listener. So welcome and join in as we dive into this episode. In this episode, we turn our attention to Australia, and Danny Jordan and I talked to Mark Field. I've known Mark for 5-6 years and also worked with Mark on a variety of projects. He's the archetypal industry insider. He's worked supplier side and he's worked retailer side, and now he's consulting. So a very similar journey to my own. And I like the way he brings a forensic lens to some of the issues that are going on in Australian retail and bridges back to some American trends and UK and European trends as well. So you're getting a lens that looks at Australia, but through the links that Australia has with the other markets and the trends that are washing between the markets. Really interesting piece. We talk dark stores, we talk e-commerce, trends, innovation, retailer behaviour, as well as zooming in on a couple of the businesses that Mark knows particularly well, such as Coles and Woolies over there. So one point of clarification, when Mark talks about CBD, he isn't referring to the cannabinoid and that new category. He's referring to the central business district. So in European or British terms, a high street, or in American terms, downtown. Simple as that. So, without further ado, let's talk to Mark. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Hi, Hamish. Thanks very much. Great to be with you today.
Perfect. Great. Well, look, would you mind telling listeners, just to kick off with, really, just a little bit about yourself and how you wound up in Australia? How did you get to where you are today then?
Well, I think I've been very lucky, Hamish, and I think I've also had some great support from fantastic leaders that have really pushed me. But after leaving Bristol University in the UK, I was fortunate enough to work for Hilton Food Group at a time where the food industry was going through significant change, particularly around red meat. And, whilst incredibly challenging, it was also very rewarding and created some fantastic opportunities for me. From there, after 9 years and having had the opportunity to build some fantastic factories with them as we invested in the red meat sector, I had the opportunity to join Moy Park when they bought the Padley operation up in the Midlands. And from there, I moved on to become technical director for Two Sisters Food Group as they went through their highly acquisition phase from 9 factories to the over 30 and the strong business that we all know now. And then literally one afternoon while I was traveling between factories, I got a call from Australia from a lady called Tina Geary, who most of you listeners will know from her Sainsbury's days, said, "Mark, would you like to come out to Australia and see us?"
I know Tina. We worked on desserts for a couple of years together, and she worked into Judith Batchelor, who was on the board of Jess, I think, at that point as well. So, interesting. Right. So Tina calls you. What happens then, Mark?
Literally got a phone call, flew out to Australia 2 weeks later. And I would always say by lunchtime of the first day, I decided Australia and the opportunity here was what I wanted to do next in my career. And it was actually Friday afternoon of that week where my wife and I were in a little tea shop, actually in the village where we live now, or the suburb where we live now, when my wife Deb decided, okay, we're going to come out, we're going to give it a go, and we're going to bring our 2 girls on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I went back, gave a notice in, and arrived here the 4th of December 2011 and spent the first month on my own, really understanding what an Australian Christmas could look like. And getting used to the hot climate and trying to eat turkey or prawns in 30 degrees temperature. Okay. So very fortunate. I had a fantastic time at Coles under the ownership of Wesfarmers, working for people like Ian McLeod and John Durkin, really taking private label from a cheaper version of the brands to a customer-focused, trusted brand that it is today, and growing the business from 7 billion Australian to in excess of 9 billion now and 30% penetration. So it's a great journey. And then 14 months ago, I decided that now was the time to do something I'd always wanted to do, which was launch Prof Consultancy, which is what we've had in the market now for 14 months and enjoying every day, Hamish.
So let's pick up a few of those threads then. Let's talk about where Coles are in the market right now. So where are they located? How are they trading? What issues are they grappling with? And how is your old baby, the private label brand, going?
Private label in Australia has gone on a fantastic journey about building customer trust, operating in the same way that we would know from the UK and from other overseas markets. And it's been about taking the customer on that journey and moving away from products that are, if you're on a tight budget, you're going to compromise on quality, you're going to compromise on taste, but you're buying to a price point, to actually move into a market now where consumers will buy products because they like the innovation, they trust the quality, they recognize the price. And there's been some very significant work around animal welfare and food nutrition standards to take products on that journey. I think Coles, without doubt, have gone through one of the biggest transformation in the last 30 or 40 years of food retailing. And it's gone from stores that had incredibly poor availability and were not welcoming to customers to be a lot more focused now on how do you create the right environment. And some of the new stores that we're seeing now being built and have seen over recent years have performed very well in things such as the IGD reports and so forth, for really being world-class stores. And, there's always that balance, Hamish, between the stores you can afford to invest in and try things and the stores that are just an important part of the community where you need to make sure that they're clean, tidy and as well refitted as they can be based on the level of trade that those stores do. So I would say that, but if you look at it wider, I think Australian retail has now arrived on the world stage in the range of products, the brand positioning of the products, but also the shopping experience, whether it's a great big store or whether it's one of the more modern metro stores that are, part of your community that are very heavy on the wood, that soft feel, that very light ambience. I think we've got a range of that here, which makes the customer experience quite exciting. Sure. Private label has gone from mid 20 penetrations now. Coles would be over 30. Woolworths would be the biggest retailer here, and they would be sort of near 35% private label. But on a global scale, there's still significant progress or significant headroom that could be achieved to really bring it to where it should be. 40% is a publicly made target for Coles, and you'd expect Woolworths or Coles to be there or thereabouts in the next 3 to 5 years.
It was a long march, thinking about it from UK terms, through the 80s and 90s before private label got into the mid-40s, certainly from the 30s to the 40s. So it is a long march for private label. Is that what you've seen across all the retailers in Australia?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with you, Hamish. But, what we have got is the advantage now of being able to play catch up by understanding what's worked very well internationally. So you're not pioneering. You've got the ability to say what's worked really well in other markets. What does that mean for our market? And what does that mean for our customer? And then how do you execute a plan quickly that helps you to make the headwind faster? Yeah.
Sure. And what about e-commerce? Is that a growing factor? I mean, I kind of imagine in my head that it's big in the metropolitan areas, but less so in more kind of central Australia. I mean, is that where it's at the moment? What have you seen on e-commerce?
So e-commerce has been incredibly exciting. And, if you only look back within the last 3 to 4 years, that whole e-commerce platform has come from a very low base up to both retailers having businesses that are over $1 billion. I think Coles are well over $1 billion. I think Woolworths now are over 3 billion Australian dollars, where they've grown incredibly quickly. I think what we are seeing with the dynamics of this market are businesses using the e-commerce platform to buy great quality, great value products for their offices or for their factories, for the tea rooms, which is a big part of the industrial culture here. At the same time as people such as you and I that were said, instead of going shopping this week, let's order it online and have it delivered. The challenge in Australia, as you were saying, Hamish, is about the scale of the country. As an example, if you go from Melbourne to Perth by rail, that takes 3 days.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that affects your balance of frozen versus ambient versus chilled as well across the ranges, right?
Yes, it does in some cases. But, ultimately what it means is you need to have a regional supply base where it makes sense. So you can get the freshest products into your DC for your e-commerce platform, or for your stores for your consumers, as opposed to having, one large central factory that's producing all your products and supplying the country.
Sure.
So this market is very focused on fresh. Fresh is definitely the battleground between Coles, Woolworths, and Aldi.
And if you look, sort of wind it back into the three sort of buckets that I think about e-commerce, you've got sort of brands selling straight to consumers direct. You've got that bit of mainstream bricks and mortar store that sells online. And then you have the specialist online retailers. Have you seen that full emergence in the Australian market of the direct-to-consumer brands selling direct, the piece you were just describing, which is a bricks and mortar retailer going online, and the specialist players like over here, we would have Amazon, Ocado, etc.?
Yeah, so I think we're on the journey, Hamish. So Amazon arrived here probably 4 years ago, just announced some really impressive figures for the Australian market as recently as this week. What we are seeing is, so we're seeing their arrival, and I think their arrival has made the traditional retailers accelerate their plans. We've also had the advantage of seeing 10 years worth of development within the e-commerce platform driven by the severe challenges of COVID. So ultimately, networks and supply chains have been ramped up and seen more investment than they would have seen over the last 12 months. But what we're also seeing is brands deciding that, a lot of the equity now is about how do you connect with your final consumer. And that D2C model is seeing some significant interest now because it's an opportunity to connect directly with that end consumer, to understand their behaviors, get them into a subscription model, which creates convenience and value for them. But as many of us know, that once you join a subscription model, it's easier to stay in it than it is to exit it. So it builds brand loyalty also, where you've got great products that make sense.
And if we nip back, Mar, we've talked about Coles e-commerce, and you've talked about the transformation in that business. Cast an eye over Woolies and Aldi for us. What's happened to those retailers over the last 5-10 years?
What you have got is two different approaches to deliver an e-commerce program for Australian consumers in food grocery. You've got Coles that have done the well-publicised long-term deal with Ocado, where their first facility should be online within the next 2 years or so. Woolworths have invested significantly in their distribution centres, but they've also invested in micro-fulfilment centres, which are actually super exciting. And that's where you've got the ability then to pick the product by a high level of automation in the back of stores and get the product from a store to a customer quicker. So it raises two questions. Are you better to pick the product from the DC and get it to the customer, or as in the Ocado model? Or are you better to pick it in the neighborhood and get it to consumers as quickly as possible? So both retailers taking two very different approaches to deliver the same outcome for consumers. So really excited to watch how that evolves, Hamish.
Yeah, sure. We've seen a bit of that over here. And the other trend we've seen over here is kind of dark stores, where in the major conurbations, Tesco, for instance, have got stores that are effectively warehouses serving consumers direct. So have you seen that emergence, and can you see one of the big boys having a play with that model?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the key things that we did during my time at Coles to try and drive that footfall for the e-commerce platform, was converting stores into dark stores where it made sense, particularly in the CBD areas where, everyone laughs and jokes about Melbourne and Sydney traffic. But when you're building an e-commerce platform, it's a key consideration. So having a dark store in good locations within the CBD enables you to get to those customers quicker. So absolutely. And we're also seeing a push towards dark kitchens also now, where we're seeing, the complemented fresh food offer that comes through the similar type of production schedule.
I've always been in awe of the Australian innovation and NPD, because it just seems to me they're a couple of years ahead of the UK, which the UK is often a year or two ahead of mainland Europe, and America largely does its own thing. The American food trends don't always travel well across the Atlantic, but the Australian trends do. I think of GI, I think of, fermentable foods, kombuchas, sourdoughs. I think of a lot of the botanicals, the functional foods. What's really hot in Australia right now in terms of trends? And what can we discern from the UK market? Is there anything we should watch out for?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Hamish. I think, across core commodity lines, we are a market that's highly influenced by the US, particularly New York. and also highly influenced by the UK. And I would say, where those trends are coming through, we generally see those reflected here within 2 to 3 years. They start with food service and they move from food service into mainstream retail. And that's where we see the flavors coming through and the new products and so forth. I think we're incredibly lucky because we're so close to Asia that our market is highly influenced by Asian cuisine and Asian styles of cooking, which I think drives some of our food trends, which is incredibly exciting. But I think also Australia is a culture for food where food rules are not important. And what I mean by that, to give it some context, if 2 ingredients go together and they make something that's amazing, that's okay. It's not the fact that we've never put them together traditionally, so we're not going to blend them now. So actually that low level of restriction on how we build food is an advantage for this market. What we're seeing is a trend towards authentic foods, but we're also seeing a good trend towards foods inspired by Australian cuisines. Free from continues to be a strong growth area in this market. Australians have got a very high level of food intolerance. So as such, gluten-free continues to be strong. And actually, our level of detection for gluten here is 0 detection, which gives us some of the best gluten-free products and standards globally. We're also seeing some really strong work around wellness and how do we take traditional ingredients and how do we bring that into food. Fermented foods, as you said, is incredibly strong at the moment also. So, I would say anything that fits into the health and wellness category at the minute, which Australia has got great credibility in, is seeing some really strong drives.
What about vegan and that new paradigm that's challenging? How much of vegan, dairy-free, etc., are you seeing in Australia?
So, Hamish, that's a great question. We're seeing a significant amount. And I think, the vegan community is important and is driving good growth. But where the real growth is coming from is a flexitarian. So we're seeing incredible innovation around plant-based foods, around dairy-free products, but also we're seeing some really exciting work around cell-cultured meat and how that could change the way in which we see food production for the future. So super exciting.
Sure. Who's doing that cell-cultured? Is it the big meat firms or is it kind of new startup biotechs?
No, it's new startup biotechs, very, very smart people, very well back through the early stages of funding. And I think Australia's on the global stage there with regards to what it's producing at this stage. Sure.
Interesting. And thinking to the sort of European British eye, the concept of states can be a little not problematic, but we do have regional variances over here, but they don't seem as marked as some of the variances in Australia. Could you explain the state system, and could you explain what sort of each state is famous for, and does the structure of its food industry kind of reflect that?
Oh, that's a great question, Hamish. I think if you look at the Eastern Seaboard, where you've got the majority of the population, you've got a high level of European ancestry down through there, as long as a strong blend of Asians because of the connection with mainland Asia, as we were talking also. So I think across there's a high level of street food and influence of street food that's coming into fine dining, restaurants, and then working its way into retail. I think as you get then into the more regional areas, what you've got is just great quality local produce, particularly thinking South Australia as an example. I think Tasmania's had a fantastic run over the last 18 months because of its clean, green and fresh image, and has done incredibly well around things such as salmon, as an example. And I think you get across to Perth, and Perth is seen as being a fantastic area for fresh produce, but also a great quality beef that we're seeing coming from those areas also, yeah.
Looking forward, the Australian food and drink industry, particularly food service, has been on the ropes like it has everywhere with COVID. You're now in your summer. The vaccine's on its way. What future do you predict? Let's say the next year and a half for the trade. Do you see a slow and gentle kind of climb back? Do you think of the food service channel and confidence generally, or a big uptick in confidence, or more uncertainty? And what's going to happen in your view to the trade?
Yeah, so I think we've had an incredibly hard year, as you say, Hamish. I think, the real positive is, as part of the recovery programme, the federal government has committed to spending nearly 1.7 billion Australian dollars into food manufacturing, so that we become, again, a world-class producer of food, not just for our own market, but also for international markets. So I think that's incredibly exciting. I think the challenge, particularly around food service, is the restrictions on people going back into the office. So, if you look at the CBD areas, which Victoria at the moment is still limited to 50% capacity, that continues to put immense pressure on the coffee shop that you would go to in the morning, the cafe you'd go to for the lunch, and maybe the bar or the restaurant you'd go to with friends in an evening, bearing in mind that pre-COVID, Australians generally ate out 2 to 3 times a week. So I think that food service sector is regaining business where restrictions are permitting. But while the environment is strong at the moment, we shouldn't forget that a number of businesses are still struggling because they're still restricted. I think what will it look like in 2 years' time? I think we will continue to see fantastic cuisines coming to market. We will see more chefs opening up new facilities. But I think we will see a different blend between people eating in a restaurant or a cafe versus what's delivered to your door. And I think this whole meal delivery system, whether it's through Uber or whether it's through meal kits, will be an important part of their business and strategy moving forward.
Sure. Perfect. Mark, that's really helpful. And just finally for listeners, we've obviously worked together, but for listeners who don't know what Prof Consulting does and how they can help, who's your target and what do you offer and how can you help?
So Prof Consulting is really born by wanting to bring the customer to any decision tree across food production. So as we go in and help businesses, whether they're the big end of town and private equity owned, or whether they're multinationals, or whether they're mum and dads that have got great product in the market at the moment and want to take it into new markets, we're going in giving them the experience of international food manufacturing, the help from understanding the retailers and helping them define who's their target customer. How does that align with the retailer strategy? And how do we join the dots so they get commercial success quicker, where the product opportunity makes sense?
Thanks, Mark. So how can folks get in touch with you if they want to put the feelers out and have a chat?
Hamish, thanks for the opportunity. It's always good to talk to you. Really appreciate your time. If any of the listeners are keen to reach out and understand what we can do either in Australia or through our international networks, please visit our website at www.profcg.com or check me out on LinkedIn. Thanks, Hamish.
Yeah, fantastic, Mark. Thanks for sharing and for sparing your evening with us to get this in the can. So I'm sure we'll be talking soon. Cheers. So that was great. And a huge thanks to Mark for giving up part of his evening to talk to us here. I hope you found that interesting. I think for me, the standout was the e-commerce development in Australia and how that's mirroring a lot of what we're seeing in the UK retail scene and the European retail scene, but also taking it another direction as well, forging its own path. It was great to hear about the trends as well. And I've always looked to Australia as a beacon and a place to look at if you want to understand what's coming down the track. And Mark himself is able to give that nuanced and rounded view that I think is really valuable to try and get your head around the Australian retail scene. So thank you for listening, and I hope you found that informative. I hope you found that interesting, and I look forward to speaking to you on the next episode. Goodbye. So thanks for listening to the FMCG Insider podcast. This has been a great episode. Please follow our Instagram and our LinkedIn to make sure you don't miss our next installment of the FMCG Insider. Until next time, goodbye.